There is a fuel pump in the Mojave Desert, in a town of almost no permanent residents, and for about 100 miles of old Route 66, it is the only one that matters. The town is Amboy, California. The pump sits in front of a motel and cafe with a mid-century sign that has appeared in more photographs than most national monuments. It does not run around the clock. It does not always run at all. And the price on the board is roughly what you would expect from the last commercial transaction available before a very long silence. If you drive past that pump westbound with a needle sitting below a quarter, you have made a decision. Not a mistake, not yet. A decision. The pavement ahead of you is real. It is signed, it appears on every mapping app in existence, and it will carry you for hours through country where nobody is looking for you. That is the trap. Route 66 does not feel like wilderness. It feels like a road. It has painted lines. It has place names on the map that turn out to be concrete slabs and a chimney. People die out there every few years because a road that looks like a road cannot possibly be dangerous. Route 66 was 2,448 miles long. It began at Michigan Avenue in Chicago and ended, in its final form, at an intersection in Santa Monica a few blocks from the Pacific. It crossed 8 states and 3 time zones: Illinois, Missouri, a 13-mile clip of the southeast corner of Kansas, then Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. It was born on paper on November 11, 1926, when the federal government approved the numbered highway system, and it was killed on paper on June 27, 1985, when the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials voted it out of existence. Here is the part that matters. Roughly 85% of it is still drivable. The road was decertified, not demolished. The federal shields came down, the maintenance responsibility fragmented across counties and townships, the mile markers vanished, and thousands of miles of 1920s and 1930s pavement were left lying in the dirt where they fell. It is the longest abandoned engineering project in the United States that you can still legally drive at highway speed. And large stretches of it have no fuel, no water, no shade, no traffic, and no reliable way to call anyone. Now let me explain what makes this road different from every other old highway in America, because it is not nostalgia and it is not neglect. It is the way the thing was built. Interstates are engineered. Someone surveys a line, buys the land, blasts the grade, banks the curves, and pours a shoulder wide enough to die on safely. Route 66 was not engineered, it was stitched. Federal planners in 1926 did not build a road from Chicago to the ocean. They took existing roads, farm-to-market tracks, county gravel, old wagon routes, stagecoach traces, and a Civil War-era military survey across northern Arizona, and they gave the resulting chain a single number. The number was the invention. The pavement was inherited. That means Route 66 does not fight terrain. It obeys it. Where the land bent, the road bent. Where a farmer's property line ran, the road ran. Where a river had already carved the only passable notch through a mountain, the road took the notch at whatever grade the notch happened to offer. You get blind curves with no warning, lanes narrower than a modern pickup mirror to mirror, pavement laid 9 feet wide because that was generous in 1927, and crests where the sightline simply stops. And because it followed the path of least resistance for 2,448 miles, it also collected every category of hazard the continent has. This is the thing people miss. Route 66 is not a desert road. It is a Great Lakes road, and a river bluff road, and a plains road, and a high altitude road, and a desert road, and it changes character faster than any driver can recalibrate. The single highway that runs through Chicago blizzards also crosses the Continental Divide in New Mexico at 7,275 feet, its highest point, and then drops into a basin where the ground can cook a barefoot in under a second. One road, one number, no warning between them. The extremes are documented and they are absurd. Flagstaff, Arizona, sits on the old alignment at close to 7,000 feet and averages roughly 100 inches of snow a year, which is more than Anchorage. 400 miles of the same road later at Needles, California, the thermometer has reached 125 degrees Fahrenheit, putting it among the hottest inhabited places ever measured in North America. Then there is Baghdad. Baghdad was a Route 66 railroad settlement in the Mojave, west of Amboy, and it holds a record no other place in the United States has taken from it. Between October of 1912 and November of 1914, Baghdad went 767 consecutive days without measurable rainfall, 2 years and 2 months. There is nothing left of Baghdad now. The buildings were bulldozed after the interstate took the traffic. You drive over the site without knowing, and the only marker is a scatter of foundation gravel and some tamarisk that a family planted for shade a century ago. People argue about the exact figures on records like these. Old weather stations were poorly sighted, thermometers were read by hand, and railroad agents were not meteorologists. Fine. Dispute the decimals. The operational reality does not move. On the same highway in the same calendar year, you can be shoveling out of a whiteout at 7,000 feet and 500 miles down the line be standing on asphalt, hot enough to soften the adhesive on your shoes. Now the names. Most people know one of them. John Steinbeck put it in The Grapes of Wrath in 1939, and it stuck so completely that it is now printed on souvenir magnets. He called it the Mother Road. It was meant as a description of function, not affection. It was the artery that carried the dispossessed out of the collapsing plains toward a coast that did not want them. The name people have forgotten is the one the road earned from the people who used it daily. They called it Bloody 66. That was not branding, it was arithmetic. Route 66 was fully paved by 1938, and paving a road built on wagon geometry does not fix wagon geometry. It just lets you hit it faster. Sections were built 3 lanes wide, with a shared center lane meant for passing in both directions, an arrangement that drivers of the era named the suicide lane without any irony at all. Add no seatbelts, no crumple zones, no collapsible steering columns, drum brakes, tires that failed without warning, and no shoulder to leave the road onto. Then add the fact that this was the primary long-haul trucking corridor to the southwest. Understand the baseline. In the 1930s, the American traffic death rate per mile driven was more than 10 times what it is today. Not 10% higher, 10 times. Route 66 carried a disproportionate share of the country's long-distance driving through some of the worst geometry in the system. The nickname predates the era when anyone tracked fatalities route by route, which is exactly why there is no clean statistic to quote. The people who drove it did not need a statistic. They needed a nickname. What these people failed to do was subscribing to our channel. Just kidding, but if you subscribe, you will never miss out on life-saving information. The first bodies on this road were not modern. 2 of them are worth knowing about because together they explain the 2 ways Route 66 kills, and it has never really invented a third. The first way is mud. In the Texas Panhandle, near a spot called Jericho, the original alignment crossed roughly 18 miles of black clay. Dry, it was a road. Wet, it became a substance with the approximate properties of coal tar. Vehicles did not skid in the Jericho Gap. They were absorbed. Wheels went down to the hubs and stopped, and the more throttle a driver applied, the deeper the situation became. Local farmers kept teams, harnessed for exactly this reason, and charged what the traffic would bear to drag strangers back onto solid ground. Travelers of that era wrote about the gap the way sailors write about a reef. Some of them sat there for days. It was not paved out of existence until the late 1930s. The second way is people. At a place called Two Guns on the Arizona high desert near Canyon Diablo, a man named Earl Cundiff held the lease on the land where Route 66 crossed. In the mid-1920s, he took on a partner, a showman calling himself Harry Miller, who built a trading post and a roadside zoo to bleed money out of passing tourists. The partnership went bad the way roadside partnerships did. In 1926, the year the highway was numbered, Miller shot Cundiff dead on the property. He claimed self-defense and a jury let him go. Two Guns also sits beside a cave that the tourist signage has for a century advertised as the site of a massacre in 1878, in which Navajo fighters are said to have trapped and killed a raiding party of Apache men inside. How much of that is history and how much of it is a ticket-selling invention is still argued over, and honest researchers will tell you the record is thin. The ruins are still there. The concrete is still there. The cave is still there. That is the pattern from the very first year. Nobody kept a central ledger of who died on Route 66 ever, and the reason is bureaucratic rather than sinister. It was never one road. It was 8 states worth of separately administered pavement wearing a shared number, and when the number was retired, the paperwork scattered with it. Which brings me to the fuel gauge, and I want to be unromantic about this because it is the single most important instrument in your vehicle on this road. The interstates that replaced Route 66 are built around commerce. Every exit is an invitation. Gas, food, lodging, repeat, forever. Route 66 was built around towns, and the interstates took the town's traffic away, and then the towns died. What is left is a corridor lined with the corpses of service infrastructure: Glen Rio, Ende, Cuervo, Texola, Two Guns, Ludlow, Siberia, Baghdad, Chambliss, Cadiz Summit. Some of these have a standing wall. Most have a slab, a rusted sign frame, and a pit where the tanks were pulled. The mapping software does not know they are dead. It knows there is a road and roads have towns, and it will route you between two names as if both were open for business. The stretch that punishes this most reliably is the run in San Bernardino County, California, where Old 66 is signed as the National Trails Highway. From Ludlow to Needles is roughly 100 miles of it, and the only meaningful fuel on the old road itself is that pump at Amboy, with hours set by whoever is working. Miss it or find it closed, and you are committed. There is no midpoint. There is no fallback. There is 100 miles of pavement across a basin that once went 2 years without rain. And then there is the signal. Most of that corridor has no usable coverage, not slow coverage, none. You will watch the bars go as you leave the interstate, and what replaces them is a small icon indicating your phone is now a camera, a flashlight, and a brick. You cannot call. You cannot text your coordinates. You cannot load the map you did not download. You cannot look up how far it is to anything. The isolation is not just electronic, it is statistical. The interstate is 20 or 30 miles north of you, carrying essentially all of the traffic. Old 66 gets a trickle. A few sightseers in daylight, motorcycle groups in the cool months, the occasional local. At night in July, it can go hours without a vehicle. If you break down at 2 in the afternoon in August, the realistic question is not when help arrives. It is whether anyone drives past before dark and whether you are still capable of flagging them down when they do. Now, what this road does to machines, because it is not what people assume. Historically, the failure mode was fuel starvation, and it was geometric. Early cars fed gasoline from tank to engine by gravity. On a steep enough climb, the engine ended up higher than the tank, and the fuel simply stopped arriving. The workaround used by thousands of drivers on the notorious grades of western Arizona was to turn the car around and climb the mountain in reverse. That is not folklore. That is how people got over the pass. The modern failure mode is tires and suspension, and it is worse than it sounds. Much of the surviving pavement is original or near original, 1930s concrete slab or thin asphalt laid over it, with 90 years of expansion joints, frost heave, unrepaired edge collapse, and no shoulder to speak of. The edges do not taper. They drop. Put a wheel off in the wrong place at 60 and you are not correcting a drift, you are catching a curb. In summer, surface temperatures on that black asphalt climb far above air temperature, and tire pressure rises roughly 1 psi for every 10 degrees. A tire that was marginal in a cool garage is a tire near its limit out there, flexing on broken pavement in triple-digit heat. Here's the paradox that this road hands you, and it is exactly as ugly as it sounds. Your air conditioning is what keeps a sealed vehicle interior survivable when the outside air is 118. Your air conditioning also loads the engine, raises coolant temperature, and reduces your fuel economy substantially. In heat above 110, the ambient air moving through your radiator is too hot to shed heat efficiently in the first place. So, on a long climb, you face a choice between protecting the machine and protecting the body inside it, and there's no configuration that does both. And a vehicle that returns 32 miles per gallon on a freeway in Illinois can return low 20s out there. A motorhome or a truck pulling a trailer in that heat, at that grade, can be in single digits. Now let me tell you about the largest human event this road ever carried, because the deaths are real and almost none of them were counted. Between roughly 1935 and 1940, something in the range of 200,000 people left the southern plains for California. Dust, foreclosure, tractors, drought, and debt pushed them out, and there was one practical route west, Route 66. They came out of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, Missouri, and Kansas in vehicles that were not fit for the trip. Model A's with bald tires, farm trucks with the bed converted to living space, mattresses roped to the roof, entire households riding on top of the load. They carried canvas water bags lashed to radiator caps and front bumpers because canvas sweats and evaporation cools the water, and because there was nothing else. The last obstacle was the worst one. Between the Colorado River and the farm valleys of California lay the Mojave, and the crossing was several hundred miles of nothing. Radiators boiled, bearings failed. People learned to cross at night, leaving the river after sundown and running until light, not for comfort, but because a boiling engine in daylight was a stranding, and a stranding was a possible death. Families carried spare water solely for the cooling system, which meant choosing between the engine and the children. Broken vehicles were abandoned where they quit. Contemporary accounts describe the roadside as a scrapyard for hundreds of miles, and when they arrived, they were met with a border. California had agricultural inspection stations near Daggett and Yermo where 66 came in, and in practice they became something other than agricultural. In February of 1936, the Los Angeles police chief, James Edgar Davis, sent a detachment of well over 100 officers to the state's borders with instructions to turn back people arriving without money. It was outside their jurisdiction, and everyone involved knew it. The press called it the Bum Blockade. It ran for weeks. Its function was to convert the Mojave from a crossing into a wall and to make sure that people who had spent everything they had to reach the state line understood that the road did not end in a welcome. Nobody knows how many died on that migration. There was no agency counting. Deaths were recorded when they were recorded by whichever county coroner happened to have jurisdiction over the patch of desert involved, filed under names spelled by whoever was listening, for people whose families had no fixed address to be notified at. Children died of dysentery and heat at roadside camps. Adults died of untreated infections, of exhaustion, of engine fires, of collisions on that suicide lane geometry. The single largest internal migration in modern American history moved down this highway, and its casualty list does not exist. Then there is the pass. Between Kingman, Arizona, and the Colorado River, the original alignment climbed over the Black Mountains through Sitgreaves Pass at about 3,550 feet, past the mining town of Oatman. On paper, 3,550 feet is nothing. In practice, it was the most feared piece of pavement on the entire route. Switchbacks with no guardrail, grades that pushed period vehicles past their limit, drop-offs measured in hundreds of feet directly off the outside edge, with a lane width that gave two cars passing each other essentially no error budget at all. This is where the reverse gear climb came from. This is also where an entire cottage industry appeared, because plenty of travelers took one look at the grade and refused. Local men with sturdier vehicles would drive your car over the pass for you for a fee, while you rode as a passenger or walked. Others simply towed you. Guidebook writers of the 1940s warned drivers about the section in plain language. Families arriving from Illinois with everything they owned strapped to the roof reached the bottom of that climb in a machine already cooked by 400 miles of desert and had to decide whether to attempt it in the dark or wait for morning heat. The pass was so bad that it was the reason the road moved. In 1952, a new alignment opened to the south through Yucca, bypassing Oatman entirely, and the town nearly folded. The old pavement is still up there. You can drive it today. The guardrail situation has not fundamentally improved. The third thing this road did was kill a town with chemistry, and this one is fully documented because the federal government had to buy the corpse. Times Beach, Missouri, sat on Route 66 southwest of St. Louis, a small riverside community of a couple of thousand people with unpaved streets. Unpaved streets make dust. The standard cheap fix was to spray them with waste oil. In the early 1970s, the town hired a waste hauler named Russell Bliss to do exactly that, and Bliss sprayed the roads of Times Beach repeatedly over several years. What nobody in Times Beach knew was where some of Bliss's oil had come from. He had also been hauling waste from a chemical operation whose byproduct stream contained dioxin, and it had gone into the same tanks. The residents of Times Beach had their streets, their yards, and their children's play areas coated in one of the most toxic compounds ever produced by industry, at concentrations that, when finally tested in 1982, were hundreds of times above the level considered hazardous. The sequence after that was fast and grim. Testing in late 1982, a catastrophic Merrimack River flood in the same weeks that pushed contaminated soil through every house in town. A federal buyout announced in 1983 amounting to tens of millions of dollars. Evacuation, dissolution of the municipality, demolition. Eventually, an on-site incinerator burned the soil itself, and the whole operation was not finished until the late 1990s. What these people failed to do was subscribing to our channel. Just kidding, but if you subscribe, you will never miss out on life-saving information. Here's the detail I want you to hold on to. That ground is now a state park. It is called Route 66 State Park. There is a visitor center in the old roadhouse across the river, and people picnic on the site of a town that had to be burned because of what was put on its roads. The fourth thing is the slowest, and it is the one that killed the most places. In 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act authorized the interstate system, and over the next 28 years, 4 interstates ate Route 66 in segments. Every time a bypass opened, the traffic that had been the entire economic basis of a string of towns simply stopped arriving, on a known date, overnight. Glen Rio is the clean example. It straddled the Texas and New Mexico line, close enough that a diner could sit in one state while its parking lot sat in the other. It had motels, cafes, fuel, a post office, and families who had built their working lives on the volume of cars coming through. Interstate 40 bypassed it in 1975. The Arisman family, who had run lodging and food there for decades, watched the number go to nothing. Glen Rio is a ghost town now in the literal sense. Standing buildings, no residents, sun-bleached signage advertising services to no one. Williams, Arizona, fought hardest and lasted longest. Its bypass opened on October 13, 1984, the last town on the entire route to lose the road, and the town had spent years in litigation and negotiation to delay exactly that morning. 8 months later, the number itself was voted out of existence, and now the part that never makes sense to me. People come here on purpose in enormous numbers for the feeling. Route 66 tourism is a real global industry. Visitors fly into Chicago or Los Angeles specifically to drive a decommissioned highway, and international travelers make up a large share of the traffic on the emptiest sections. They come for the neon, the diners, the murals, the photographs at the Santa Monica sign that is not actually the official terminus. The revival was not organic either. It was largely started by a barber in Seligman, Arizona, named Angel Delgadillo, whose town was strangled by its bypass, and who organized the first historic Route 66 association in 1987 to sell the past back to the people who had abandoned it. Amboy is the purest version of the paradox. A businessman named Albert Okura bought the entire town in 2005 for roughly $400,000, kept the sign lit, and worked at bringing the pumps back. He died in 2023, and so the busiest thing in that 100-mile gap is now a photo stop, where visitors from cooler countries pull in at midday in a rental car with a quarter tank, take a picture of a sign, and then drive west into a basin with no signal, no shade, and no second pump, because the map showed a road and the road was paved. The counting problem is the same as it was in 1936. There is no fatality figure for Route 66 because Route 66 is not an administrative entity anymore. Deaths on the surviving alignments are logged by whichever county owns that pavement, filed as county road incidents, and never aggregated. What the desert counties of California and Arizona do report is a steady pattern. Heat-related deaths in the low desert every summer, stranded motorists on unmaintained roads, search and rescue call-outs for vehicles found by air days after the fact, and remains recovered from the open Mojave with no clear connection to any missing person report. And whatever those numbers are, they are floors. They do not include the people who left the old highway onto a dirt track and were logged somewhere else entirely. They do not include vehicles found years later on roads nobody patrols. They do not include the migration dead of the 1930s who were never on a list. They do not include the people whose remains have not been located, which in that country is not a rare category. What gets me is how small the trigger always is. A pump that was closed on a Sunday, a tire that was fine at home, a dirt shortcut that saved 12 minutes on a screen, a grade attempted at 4 in the afternoon instead of 7 in the morning. Every one of those is a nothing decision. Make any of them in Missouri and you lose an hour. Make them between Ludlow and Needles in July and there is no slack anywhere in the system to absorb it. The distance between inconvenience and emergency on this road is not measured in miles. It is measured in gallons, in degrees, and in whether anyone on Earth knows which pavement you are on. The people who crossed this country before there was a number knew that, and their knowledge was organized around one thing: water. Long before Route 66, before the military survey, before the wagon road, the Mojave people ran a trade corridor between the Colorado River and the Pacific, and it did not follow the straight line. It followed springs, Marl Springs, Soda Springs, Butte Spring. The route existed because the water existed, and the spacing between water was the whole design. Later wagon roads, and then the railroad, and then the highway all traced roughly that same chain because there was no other option. Route 66 is the paved shadow of a footpath between water holes. The difference is that the people who walked it understood the road as a series of gaps between survival, and we understood it as a line on a phone. So go back to that pump in Amboy. It is not a photo opportunity, although that is what it has become. It is the last transaction available before roughly 100 miles of pavement where the record for consecutive rainless days in the United States was set, where nobody will drive by for hours, where your phone stops being a phone, where there is no shoulder to break down on and no shade to break down under, and where the machine keeping you alive and the machine keeping you moving are fighting each other. Fill the tank at every opportunity, all the way, whether you think you need it or not. Download the map before you lose the signal. Tell one specific person which alignment you are driving and when to worry. That is the entire lesson, and this road has been teaching it since 1926 to people who arrive convinced that a paved road with a famous name cannot be a wilderness. The pavement does not care what it is famous for. The heat does not check your itinerary, and the needle tells the truth every single time you look at it.